Here are 5 facts about Star Trek VI that you probably did not know. I found redressed sets, people being paid just to eat, cameos galore, the real world being influenced, and an unhinged alternate opening scene that could have made this film take the mantle of worst Star Trek movie. Now, full confession, this is actually my second favourite Star Trek film, and for good reason. Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country offers high stakes, political intrigue, and a perfect send-off for the original series crew. The end credits made me cry the first time I watched this film, and they still do every single time I rewatch it. So let's get into it. Star Trek VI gave us something that you would see reused in Stargate, Independence Day, Armageddon, and somewhere else somewhat surprising.
I'm not surprised, Mr. Spock.
And we may not have seen this considering how aggressive Paramount were with cost cutting. Now, the reason for keeping the budget down was that the studio would not budge from the $25 million that the Final Frontier had been given. Sets from The Next Generation were reused. The transporter room was slightly redressed. The observation lounge was then the officer's mess, and 10 Forward became the Federation President's office. This meant that when it was suggested that they might drop ILM for visual effects, it was abandoned thanks to not only the cost cutting, but also the experience of using associates in Ferrin in the previous film. And sticking with ILM meant that they created something that would become famous in special effects and seen over and over again in other movies. The Praxis effect. The effect created for the explosion of the Klingon moon at the beginning of the film was reused in the movies that I mentioned earlier. However, one very famous sci-fi movie and rival to Star Trek had the exact same effect added in later. In 1997, the special editions of the original Star Wars movies were released, and the effect can be seen not just once, but twice. The destruction of Alderaan and later, the destruction of the Death Star. Of course, these special editions were really well received and everyone was completely happy with the changes that were made. Now, luckily, special effects were the only thing that Star Wars took from Star Trek. At least they didn't take the food. How do you get your cast to eat food that one actor described as a horror? Well, you offer them $20 for each bite that they take that gets into shot. In a film full of iconic moments, one that truly stands out is the dinner scene with Kirk and his crew hosting the Klingons aboard the Enterprise. It really highlights the tensions between the Klingons and Starfleet at that moment. And it also gives us one of the most iconic lines in all of Star Trek.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
More on that later on. One thing that was added to the tension was the food in front of the cast. Now, all of it was edible, but to achieve a more alien look, blue food dye was added to it all. This, coupled with long filming sessions with multiple angles and multiple takes under hot studio lights, meant that the food became pretty unappetizing to eat. Christopher Plummer even described the scene as a horror. Mayer's solution? Offer the cast $20 for every shot of a character eating. Sounds good, right? However, only one person took him up on that offer. William Shatner, who would boldly go where no one else at that table was going and take at least a couple of bites of a purple squid. And you know what? They didn't even use the shot. Instead, this guy got it.
Shakespeare.
The Undiscovered Country is full of cameos from actors that appeared in other Star Trek entries, as well as fans of the show. Michael Dorn plays Colonel Worf, a relative of his own character. in The Next Generation. Brock Peters comes back as Admiral Cartwright. David Warner returns after appearing in The Final Frontier, but this time as the Klingon Gorkon. Kurtwood Smith, who would go on to make several appearances in Star Trek, appears here as the Federation President, and René Auberjonois appears as Colonel West, though he was actually cut from the theatrical release only to be restored for the home release. However, there is one big cameo in an unnamed role. Christian Slater. Christian Slater is a big Star Trek fan, and he managed to get a cameo role thanks to his mother, Mary Jo Slater, who was in charge of casting for the film. I mean, who said nepotism was dead? In an interview with Graham Norton on his BBC Two radio show, Slater went on to reveal that the uniform that he wore was actually William Shatner's, that was worn in The Wrath of Khan, and that he still has it for personal reasons. Now, what they are, I couldn't possibly comment, but I can't imagine he's just reenacting training exercises. Excuse me while I brush up on my Klingon for this next bit. Remember that iconic line I said we'd come back to? It also gives us one of the most iconic lines in all of Star Trek.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
More on that later on. That line led to a moment of life imitating art. In 1996, the Klingon Language Institute, yes, that is a very real thing, based in Kentucky, released a limited edition of 1,000 numbered copies, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, the restored Klingon version. I mean, this is deeply nerdy, and if you're anything like me, you think like me, it's deeply cool. However, this actually goes a little bit further. Nicholas Meyer confirms that this simple line was actually a reference to Nazi Germany's attempt to claim William Shakespeare for their own. History, geek cred, and real-world cultural impact. This movie literally has it all. But there is something that it didn't have, and I'm actually quite glad of that. There is no doubt that The Undiscovered Country is one of Star Trek's best movies with an iconic opening, but things could have been a lot different and potentially upset fans who were already angry at The Final Frontier. According to an interview in an issue of Cine Fantastique, instead of Captain Sulu on the bridge of the Excelsior being rocked by the explosion of Praxis, we would have seen the crew retired from Starfleet. Sulu would have been driving a cab. Dr. McCoy would have been found drunk in a bar, while Uhura would be channeling Fraser Crane and hosting a radio call-in show. Chekhov would be a grand champion in chess, Spock would be playing Polonius in an all-Vulcan production of Hamlet, and Captain Kirk would have been married to Carol Marcus and settled down. Only Scotty would be the one involved in Starfleet teaching engineering to cadets. Due to budget constraints I talked about earlier, this was cut from the script, and we had the opening we all know and love. But just imagine if we'd actually seen this in alternative. I think the only thing that might have redeemed it is if Uhura's show was at least called Hailing Frequencies Open.
No, not a chance.
There you have it. But now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments a fact about The Undiscovered Country that I missed. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, the best way to support this channel is to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm working towards 1,000 subscribers and I'd love to have you on board. Thanks for watching.